now to introduce our presenter for tonight's lecture. Grace Gutierrez recently graduated with her master's from the López-Uribe lab at Penn State in 2023. She got started in the bee world in 2019 at the University of Virginia. At Penn State, she investigated the thermal tolerance and factors influencing the distribution of two non-native solitary bees in North America. Grace will be continuing her education this upcoming year by starting a PhD. In her free time, you can find Grace with her dog and 2 cats or reading a good book. So we can't wait to hear from Grace tonight. So at this point, I will turn things over to her to get us started. Welcome, Grace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored and excited to kind of share the wild world of solitary bee hotels and how to build them so you can put them in your backyard. So I guess let's jump right in. So I, funnily titled it Airbnb because they're bee hotels. And so, just to talk a little bit about bee hotels. I feel like most people know them as bee hotels, but you also may have heard them called bee condos, nest blocks, or just bee houses in general. And the basic concept is that they are essentially bird houses for bees. So they provide shelter and nesting habitat for solitary bee species. And as you can kind of see from the pictures below, they come in a variety of different sizes and materials. So it's really interesting, and there's tons of personal preference and ways that you can customize your bee hotel for your liking and for your backyard. So I know that when most of us think of bees, we think of what are called social bees. So these are called honeybees or bumblebees. And these are really bees that just live in a hive, and they usually live as groups where they'll have kind of one reproducing female, the queen bee, and then she'll have her worker bees. And these worker bees help provide food and other materials for the baby bees that are being hatched. But they themselves do not lay eggs and do not have children. Only the queen bee will. However, solitary bees are not these kind of bees. So this is not what we'll be talking about. Solitary bees are a little different. So instead of having one reproducing female and tons of other workers, each female bee is a reproductive unit. And kind of like the name implies, they live alone. They don't live in a big hive like other bees. So essentially, a female bee will be a reproductive unit. So she'll lay eggs and have children, and she'll usually lay these eggs in kind of either some solitary bees are cavity nesting. So that's most of the bees that we'll be talking about today. So they make their homes in cavities, and other solitary bees are ground nesting. So they make their homes in the ground. And essentially what the female bee will do in a case of the cavity nesting bee is that she'll come and she'll kind of lay her eggs back to front in these cavities and creating little partitions in between each cell. And what's really interesting is that despite kind of common, what we think of bees, over 90% of bees in North America are actually solitary. So very few are what we would consider social bees, which is funny because that's what we normally think of when we think of bees. So I also just wanted to kind of, get you guys started with some pictures of some solitary bees that you might see in your backyard if you choose to put up a bee hotel, or just, flying around your flowers in the spring. So first off on the left, I don't know if you guys can see my clicker, but we have the mason bee Osmia georgica. So they're known for their kind of blue, body, and they have these yellow hairs on their stomachs, and that is to gather pollen and transport it back to the nest. So they're typically active in the summer, usually around June or July. And then we also have a leaf cutting bee, the Megachile pugnata, which is also active around the summer. So these two are frequent visitors to bee hotels, at least here at Penn State in the Arboretum. And then we have another solitary bee that I know many of you might be familiar with and also might not like. So it's called Xylocopa virginica, and it's also known as a carpenter bee. So you'll probably see these big guys and gals buzzing around, and you may not even like them because they make holes in your house by chewing, but they can also use bee hotels as alternatives to chewing holes in your house or your porch. So, that's a win for bee hotels. So I know that a lot of us here are here to learn about kind of building your bee hotel and, how to install one in your backyard. So let's jump right in. So I'm sure as you've seen from previous photos, so bee hotels can come in basically many different shapes, sizes, and complexities. So as I said, it's really all about personal preference and, what materials you have lying around, what's easiest for you, and, like the space that you have available to install these hotels. So kind of, we have some bee hotels can be made out of PVC pipe, as we can see here on the left. And you can see the tubes inside. Essentially, this would just be put up, like hung up somewhere in your backyard. And, it's perfect. The PVC pipe is perfectly fine for them to nest in. And then we have kind of your more classic structure, which I like to call the birdhouse structure. It's made out of wood. It has this nice overhang, and you can put, drilled blocks, tubes, all different types of nesting materials for your bees inside this structure. And then finally, this is, in my opinion, the simplest kind of hotel to make is basically a drilled block. So you can kind of see them in the middle picture here, where you just have a drilled piece of wood, but essentially that's all it is. It's a piece of wood, and it's just drilled with different sizes of varying diameters. And you can put these in your kind of birdhouse bee hotels, but I've also seen people just kind of have chunks of wood with holes drilled in them that they hung up. And that works perfectly fine. So it really is all about kind of what you want, aesthetically, your even woodworking skills, like the tools you have lying around, like all those things can play a factor. But I think it's really important to note that all of these bee hotels are are valid. Like all of these will, like the bees can nest in all of these structures. Like you don't have to worry about one basically not working and not bringing bees to your backyard. I guess my other thing is that although I did talk about like all these kind of different bee hotels, the one that I will be mainly focusing on today is kind of the birdhouse structure. Yeah. Sorry. So basically, these are kind of the basic materials that you will need to kind of start your bee hotel. So, and I'll go deeper into these kind of each one of these and how they'll be used in building your bee hotel. So first, you need kind of your hotel material, whether that's your PVC pipe or your wood. If you're doing wood, or even if you have the PVC pipe, you probably need some hammer and nails to help secure it outside and install it in your backyard. You need the hollow tubes of varying diameters for the bees to actually nest in. Some hot glue, honestly, to help plug up any holes that you find, and also to plug up the back of the nesting tube. And also, I always like to put in chicken wire. So I've seen people use chicken wire, usually around the 1/2 to 1 inch kind of diameter, because and this is for protection for the bee hotel. And I say I give the diameter mostly because you want it big enough that the bees can fit through, but small enough that, a bird couldn't, reach all the way in. And I say conditional right here, mostly because it's not necessary. I would only put chicken wire up in your bee hotel if you notice birds or other, rodents around there that are kind of like destroying your bee hotel. Otherwise, I don't think it's usually very necessary. Yeah. So kind of diving right in there. To for the hotel material, if you're doing the birdhouse bee hotel, wood, the type of wood, I use oak, pine, or spruce usually. And no pressure treated wood, because the chemicals could, potentially drive bees away. Like they don't have, I guess, like noses like we do, but they can sense chemicals that are very sensitive to chemicals. That's how they find flowers. And so you don't want to, basically put some block of stinky wood out there to, drive them away. And I also get a lot of questions. Is it okay if I waterproof my bee hotel? Is it okay if I paint my bee hotel? And I would like to say that, it's not necessary, but if you would like to, it's not harmful to the bees. Like you're not going, the chemicals in the paint or, in the waterproofing is not going to kill any bees that, live in there. I would just strongly recommend after you paint or after you waterproof, just leaving it outside for 3 to 4 days before you install it in your backyard. That just gives time for the hotel to kind of air out a little bit, so it's not, stinky to the bees. And kind of going back in, so also dimensions. So dimensions are pretty important. Usually I like to have the bee hotel be 6 to 8 inches in length. You don't want it too small because many bees will not nest in anything less than 6 inches in lengthwise. But besides that, the dimensions can kind of be up to your preference. Height and width can vary. It doesn't, you don't want to make it, if you can't take care of it, you don't want to make a gigantic bee hotel. And you also don't want to make a too tiny one. Usually I like to tell people that they want around 40 kind of nesting tubes in their bee hotel to kind of have like an ample population. So, if you can fit 40 tubes in a, just a small bee hotel, then that's great. Like it's good to go. But yeah, but height and width can vary depending on your preference. And I wanted to do this cute little animation. Since we can't be together in person to build the bee hotel together, I just thought it might be fun to kind of see how you might build it with some hammer and nails and some wood. So essentially you want to start off kind of making like a box structure with a backing, of course, too. That's very important. And then an overhang is also very important as well, kind of like the roof structure. And you want it like a little bit out from the, where the tubes will lie. And that's just to protect the tubes from rain, because they are reeds or, paper materials, so they can mold. And, we don't want moldy tubes for our bees. They probably wouldn't want to live in there. And honestly, who can blame them? So yeah, so basically, you just kind of nail these parts together using hammering nails. Yeah. And so kind of jumping into the other part of the bee hotel, the tubes. So I kind of mentioned previously, the tube materials, I've seen most people use stuff like Phragmite reeds. They're a type of reed. You can purchase them online. Cardboard tubes and straw inserts you can kind of see here. And also just drilling holes in blocks of wood. And I've seen people sometimes use bamboo tubes, but not often anymore. And if you don't have any Phragmites reeds in your backyard, they're pretty cheap online, and they come in like pretty big bundles. So it should be like just enough for you and the bee hotel that you're building. And kind of moving on to dimensions, as I mentioned previously, each tube should be around 6 inches in length. That's kind of the agreed upon length that the bees like to nest in, because they lay their eggs in there. So you don't want it too short, because then they won't lay as many eggs. And many bees just don't like to nest in short tubes. I think it's kind of like a protection thing for the female bee. If it's too short, she's like, oh, like, something could easily, more easily get in there. And also, if you see like more like professional, like bee hotels and like Arboretum, they usually have tubes of varying diameters. So I always like to say, put like tubes of varying diameters in your bee hotel, and the average is kind of like between 2.3 and 9.5 millimeters in diameter. And the size of the tube honestly just corresponds to the size of the bee that will be nesting in there. So, a bigger bee, like a carpenter bee, might nest in the bigger tubes, while, medium-sized bees will typically nest in 6 to 8 millimeter diameter tubes. And yeah, it's just great to have a variety to attract and support a variety of different bees in your bee hotel. Yeah. And kind of building off of that, prepping your tubes is very important. So there's like many different ways to do it. I've seen people stuff bits of cotton ball in one end. Some tubes come with caps to put on one end of the tubes. Or you can seal the tube with paraffin wax or hot glue. See, that's where the hot glue came in before. And this is really all for the protection of the bee larvae that are inside the tubes. There are things like parasitic wasps, beetles, that will try and make their homes in these tubes. And some parasitic wasps will steal, the provisions that the mother bee has provided for her offspring, or even eat the bee larva. So it's really important to just kind of have that, level of protection by sealing up one end. So it's just more difficult for them to get in through the back. And another thing is just another layer of protection is to place the tubes kind of flush against the back of your bee hotel. So remember in the previous slide where the bee hotel had a back, you just want to push your tubes all the way against the back. And that's just another kind of level of protection that, helps keep, things that we don't want getting our baby bees, keeps them out. And a don't, I would say, of kind of prepping your tubes for your bee hotel is please do not glue the tubes to the back of the bee hotel. Like even in research settings, I've had people do this, and it's not the best, primarily because you can't remove the tubes from kind of the bee hotel after you've glued them in, without, potentially damaging or even destroying the tubes. And so, yeah, and I'll get into this a little bit later about why kind of make sure having the tubes be able to be removed and put back in the hotel is actually very important. So yeah, so just don't glue the tubes to the back, and maybe don't buy, if you buy like a pre-made hotel, like don't buy hotels that come with the tubes glued back in. Just makes it really harder to remove them and to clean them and all that stuff. Yeah. And I also unfortunately get a lot of questions. Is it fine if if I could buy a bee hotel from a Home Depot or Lowe's? And unfortunately, I guess I would not personally recommend it. I don't want to be the bee hotel police, but at first glance, these look nice. You see they have the overhanging, they have the drilled blocks, like it looks nice. However, a lot of these bee hotels are just not long enough. They don't reach that 6 to 8 inches in length that is recommended for bee hotels. And as I've mentioned previously, a lot of these glue the tubes to the back of the hotel, so you can't remove them. And which I understand, like you don't Home Depot doesn't want to get a box of bee hotels and the tubes are everywhere. But it's just not the best for the bees that would actually be living in this hotel. And yeah, so I guess like I always say, building your own bee hotel is super fun. It doesn't take a lot of, and it can be fun for all skill levels, even, if you're not a carpenter. And so, like, I think it's a great educational opportunity, and, you also get pride in your own work. So that's great. So, you finally built your bee hotel. You've made the bee hotel, you've put the tubes in, you've sealed the tubes up, and you're like, now it is time. It is time for me to install my bee hotel. But you may be wondering, how do I do that? So I always recommend to the first year that you were doing it, install your bee hotel around kind of mid-March to early April. A lot of the very kind of early emerging bees, the bees that emerge first in the spring, that would be using this hotel, they start to emerge around late March to early April. And so kind of to have that hotel ready for them is great. And like, ready for when the females start, laying eggs and like provisioning their nests with pollen for their babies. So just having that all ready. I always say install it 3 to 4 feet above the ground, just so no vermin or any like nasty thing could get in there. So have that little layer of protection. And then also, I talked previously about having that kind of overhang to protect from rain, and also does provide some shade. You don't want like direct sunlight that's like blasting your bees with heat. But they should have some sun exposure, and it's recommended that you place your bee hotel facing the southeast, to get that exposure. And also, you want to make sure you install your bee hotel in areas that are, decently close to some flowers, just to kind of like increase your chances of having bees, move into your hotel, and also to give them, areas of easy foraging that, they can go to and then bring the pollen back to their nest easily, because a lot of these bee hotels do not have a very large foraging range. So, and a foraging range is the area like from their nest to, the flowers that they would forage on. So you just want to, have a nice little buffet for them, when, right next to their house. And I guess like something that I guess really want to, impart in this, webinar is kind of the importance of maintaining your bee hotel and proper upkeep, and how important that is basically to save the bees and maintain a healthy pollinator presence, which I'm sure that's what we all want when we are installing the house. I don't think anyone's like, yeah, perfect. and I unfortunately see a lot of, people being like, I like just put out my bee hotel and, I don't do anything to it, or like, use these bee hotels as educational opportunities for small children, which is amazing. Like I'm not saying that, no kids should learn about bees, but, you know, just having that upkeep and like cleaning it is so important because there are a lot of factors that can, kind of influence the health and basically presence of pollinators in your backyard. And I talked about one previously. It's the birds. Birds love, to them, your bee hotel is a buffet. They're like, this is so delicious. Thank you for giving me these protein-rich bee larvae for me to snack on. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, this is not a buffet. This is a bee hotel. So, kind of protecting against these birds and other vermin like rats, squirrels. Like, I've seen squirrels just, rip nesting tubes out of bee hotels. And, we don't want that. And also other things that are, I guess, like a little less out of our control and just kind of come with the territory of having a bee hotel. And so these are parasitic wasps in the center right here. Specifically, this is Monodontomerus, the Monodontomerus wasp. And basically, they are parasitic wasps that will lay their eggs kind of in a bee cocoon and essentially kill the bee larva inside it. I've done, as I previously mentioned, my master's was on solitary bees, and so I've worked with bee hotels and like used them for my experiment and also like dissected unopened cocoons to see what's inside, and it's just kind of nasty when you're expecting a bee and you open up your cocoon and it's these little teeny gross wasps. And we don't want that. So regularly checking your nesting tubes for signs of wasps, and it's just really, it's good to know and like to keep track of. So, and the third thing is fungus and mold that can grow on a bee hotel that is not properly maintained. So I think like this right here is basically a fungus called Ascosphaera fungus, and it can cause a disease called chalk brood, which essentially attacks the gut of a bee. And unfortunately, when a bee is infected with this fungus and has that disease chalk brood, it will starve to death because of the fungus's effect on its gut. Like it can't eat. And sorry. And so basically, just kind of, and so basically those were the perpetrators. And this slide, we're kind of showing what to look for to, I guess, see if these are problems that are plaguing your bee hotel. Obviously we have the bird, pecking out stuff from the bee hotel. And in the center here, I don't know if it's a little hard to see for you guys, but we have kind of a bee hotel, the nesting tube, and you can see these teeny tiny little holes in it. And those are evidence of a parasitic wasp. They will crawl in and they will lay their eggs. They'll poke through the nesting block and they will lay their eggs inside the nesting block. And on the far right, we have kind of a bee hotel opened up that has been unfortunately infected with this fungus. And, as you can see in the white is basically fungal overgrowth. These bees unfortunately have been mummified in fungus. And, sometimes there's not a lot we can do, just like humans, bees get sick. Like if you have chalk brood fungus or mites in your bee hotel, it does not mean that you are a terrible bee hotel caretaker and you're doing something wrong. This is just part of nature too, but there are things that we can do to, I guess, help prevent these things from happening. So examining your tubes, and, removing ones that have wasp holes in it, installing chicken wire to protect against, birds if you see them kind of, eating out of your bee hotel. Regularly cleaning your bee hotel and removing moldy or damp nest blocks. This really helps prevent the spread of mold and fungus in your bee hotel, which can really harm the bees that live there. And also other bees, because what happens, sorry, this is just a side example, but what happens with chalk brood is, so even if these bees are infected, but these bees aren't, if a bee that is, unfortunately been mummified and the bee behind it is fine, the bee behind it has to chew their way out to get to the outside. So they have to chew through their, chew through the fungus, which basically infects them with the fungus as well. So even if they were fine previously, they're now, they now have that fungus inside them because of, their previous sibling that was infected. And so kind of, I wanted to go over basically the life cycle of a bee hotel and, kind of when to do certain things, like, what to look for essentially. So basically, as I mentioned previously, around mid-March, you want to start prepping your bee hotel materials. I always like to give, put it like making sure you have your hotel built, your tubes ready, plugging out the backs with hot glue. I always like to, give my bee hotel a good scrub before I put it out. And a lot of people do that with a bleach solution. I wouldn't recommend dunking it in straight bleach, but a kind of a 1 part bleach to 2 parts water solution, and just giving it a scrub and just like making sure it's clean. So that's what you kind of want to do around mid-March. And so then in mid-March to early April, you put your bee hotel out in the garden to kind of get it ready for those first visitors and first people that are the first bees that are visiting that hotel. And then you kind of wait with your fingers crossed and really hope that bees will come to your garden and start using your bee hotel. I unfortunately get some people that are like, I've had my bee hotel out for 2 to 3 years and I've never gotten like a single bee. And unfortunately, sometimes that's just kind of part of just kind of the way it goes. Like if there weren't any bees around your backyard to begin with, they might not have traveled over to your backyard yet, or there might be other factors involved. I know some people purchase bees to put in their backyard bee hotel. I would strongly recommend against that, mostly because these bees are they're not native to the area. They're not native to Pennsylvania. A lot of these bees that you purchase online are shipped from the West Coast. So, that leads into a whole other kind of stream of issues where non-native species, there's a particular fly that is in the West Coast right now that is attacking bee hotels there. We don't want to bring that over here. Disease, like just all sorts of different like variables that come with, bringing in bees from the outside. It's just, I just, unfortunately, if you're not getting in anyone within the first 2 years, maybe like a bee hotel is just not not right for your garden, but that's okay. Like there's plenty of other things that you can do to help bees. Sorry, got on a tangent there. But so back to our life cycle. The third thing you want to do is starting, I said July, but if I'm being honest, it's usually around June and going into September, you want to monitor your hotel for kind of capped straws. So many bees that nest in bee hotels will kind of when they're done laying eggs and provisioning the nest, their final thing is they will cap off the tube with a mud or leaf mixture, and that it just as the mother's way of protecting her babies. So you can kind of see in this picture right here, you can kind of see those mud capped straws. And basically, when you see those capped straws, you want to take it out of your hotel, look to see if there's any wasps, like evidence of wasp parasitism on the tube, or sometimes even in the capped area, you can see a little hole. So that's also evidence. And I wouldn't say like, if they have wasp larvae, like, chuck them in the trash. I would just separate them from nesting tubes that don't have evidence of wasp parasitism. And you want to remove them from the bee hotel and place them basically in kind of a mesh bag, in kind of an enclosed area that is still kind of exposed to the temperature, because the temperature is very important for kind of their life cycle. They rely on certain number of days of warmth and number of days of cold to fully emerge in the spring. So yeah, so just kind of keep an eye on your hotel, keep an eye out for capped straws throughout September. And then kind of as the weather gets colder, you want to, remove all capped straws from the hotel and place them in kind of in a mesh bag in a outdoor frost-free area. So that can either be a screened-in porch or an unheated garage. And it's essentially to kind of protect them both from the elements, so from frost, from wind, from snow, all these things that could potentially, damage the bee hotels, whether through ice damage or, mold or, wet, like those are never good. And also to protect them from predators. Obviously, no area is completely safe from predators, but like, keeping them outside, you might, get a desperate squirrel or a desperate bird that, might not have bothered your bee hotel in the spring or summer when food was abundant, but, now, maybe it's looking pretty good. But yeah, so, and then kind of the cycle repeats. I guess one thing to mention is that, if you do have capped nest blocks, around mid-March on your second year of being a bee hotel owner, you want to place those capped nest blocks back out in either the bee hotel, or some people have emergence tubs, which are basically boxes that that have holes in them so the bees to emerge from. I don't think it really makes a difference. But basically you want to place them out so, when they're ready to emerge, they will emerge back out into your garden and, pollinate your plants and, be a lot of fun for you to enjoy as you look outside in the, kind of maybe cold gray month of April. Yeah. And so I feel like we've talked a lot kind of about the care and keeping of your bee hotel, how great bee hotels are for educational purposes and, helping support nesting resources for, over 90% of bee species in North America and Pennsylvania. But I also feel like I would be remiss if I didn't kind of talk about the downside of bee hotels and, some potential drawbacks of putting them in your backyard and using them as, they've kind of been brought up as this amazing conservation tool. And that, I guess, could be true. But it could also, like, there are downsides to having them in your kind of backyard, or to using them as, like, this great savior of the bees. And I guess the two that I want to talk about today is kind of non-native bee, like non-native bees in your bee hotel, and also bee hotels as hotspots for parasitism. I'd also like to point out, I know that I've thrown so much information at you so quickly. And luckily this will be recorded. So, maybe you could watch me at, 0.5 speed. And there's also, I've included resources on the Jenkins Third Thursday website. Amy nicely will put them up. And so if you want to read more about bee hotels, feel free to check out those resources. They're great. Yeah. So I guess kind of diving into the downside with non-native bees. So some studies have found that, bee hotels are equally, they're equally home to native bees and non-native bees. And, this is, as non-native bees have been increasing, over the past decades, like, it's not a thing about, basically getting rid of the non-native bees. I don't think that's possible. But it also, like, it's important to note that these bee hotels are being used as nesting resources for them, and that, helping perpetuate their lives. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's just something to be mindful. So I've included some basically non-native bees that you might see in your bee hotel if you're here in Pennsylvania or along the East Coast. So on the left, we have Osmia cornifrons. I will say this bee is very special to me. This is the bee that I studied in my master's. This is a mason bee. And so they're typically out and about kind of April to early June. And, they just, I guess the problem with them is that they take nesting resources away from native bees and native osmia. And the one in the center and the one on the right, so these are kind of, I guess, a more interesting case. So the wool carder bee and Anthidium manicatum, they kind of look waspy, but they are bees. And the giant resin bee, Megachile sculpturalis. And something that's really interesting about their behavior that's kind of a detriment to, their like habitat in bee hotels is that they are considered very aggressive bees. So the Anthidium manicatum is very protective of its nesting resource and the floral resources that it used. I've actually seen them, kind of like basically headbutt a bumblebee out of the flower patch that it was using. And Megachile sculpturalis is kind of the same way. They're just very aggressive. They're known for kind of attacking bees that come near the nesting resources. And the problem with this is that when they nest in a bee hotel, it basically decreases the number and likelihood that a native bee will nest in there. And I know one study done in 2020 found that there was a significant decrease in the number of native bees as the number of non-native bees increased in a bee hotel. So the more non-native bees there were in a bee hotel, the less native bees. And this is, just, sometimes, all the spaces are taken up. So to make the native bees are kind of pushed out of this nesting resource, or it's like through things like the behavior of like some bees, like in the Anthidium and the Megachile, that basically drive these native bees off. So that's not necessarily a good thing. And then kind of bee hotels have been, I guess, in more recent years, looked at as kind of parasite and pathogen hotspots for the bees that nest in there. And really, the reason for this is that, we kind of talked about in the first few slides that these bees typically live alone. like they don't live in large groups. They don't work together. They don't have that social aspect of their lives, in solitary. But typically, bees would kind of nest in uh, these, solitary, like these cavities in wood, or, in hollow stems or hollow wood, alone, kind of away from other bees. But, kind of with the drive or the rise of these bee hotels, it kind of creates this nesting aggregation. So from the one hole in the piece of wood to, 40, 50, 100 holes in kind of these bee hotels. And having them all so close together, it's just basically an easier target for, parasites, instead of them having to go to each individual bee hotel, it's like a all you can eat buffet for the parasites there. And with pathogens and disease, like, it's to use I guess a timely example, it's the difference between, during lockdown, staying in your house and, going to, crowded areas. Like, it's not necessarily like horrible, but like you are like increasing your risk of, you know, uh, like getting a disease or, parasites or pathogens. Yeah. So I guess I would like to say thank you so much for everyone listening. It's always so fun to give these talks. And I've also just included kind of links. And I've also, these links are the same as ones that I've given to Amy. So, even if you can't click this link, it will be available. And so these are all kind of extension documents talking about bee hotels, design and placement, more information on solitary bees if you're curious. And I've also not listed here, but I've also included, references on how to build different kinds of bee hotels. So, if you don't want to build the birdhouse structure, I've included resources on how to build one out of PVC pipe and a video on how to, basically drill using blocks of wood and like drilling them in holes. And I've also included basically an open access paper if you want to read more kind of about the parasites and non-native species and their effect on native bees and bee hotels. So yeah, I would like to thank you all so much again, and I would love to open the floor for questions.
Wonderful, Grace. Thank you so much. The first question, actually, if you want to stay in shared screen without making everyone dizzy, would you be able to go back to your slide where you did the life cycle of the bee hotel?
Yes.
Awesome. The first question I'm going to ask you correlates to this. Someone was asking if you could describe a little bit more the solitary bee life cycle, just so they have the clarification as they're thinking about the life cycle of the hotel as well.
Yeah, definitely. So all solitary bees kind of follow a similar life cycle, but something that does change and that I think will affect kind of your bee hotel is that there are spring bees and there are summer bees. So those spring bees are bees that emerge during the the spring. So that's kind of March and then into the very early parts of June. Is kind of when those bees will start to emerge, and then the summer bees is typically kind of June into July and August. So essentially, the life cycle of a solitary bee is I'll use spring bees as an example, but the same applies to summer bees. The bee emerges in the spring. Males typically emerge first, so they are usually placed by the mother bee at the front of the bee hotel. So they will start to emerge, and they'll kind of fly around for a little bit, just hanging out. And then usually around like 1 to 2 weeks after the male bees emerge, the female bees will emerge. And then the male and female bees will mate. And then the male bees will actually die. They do not live that well, either bee doesn't live that long, but so the males will die, and then the females will start provisioning their nest. So that's, finding a nesting resource, aka your bee hotel, gathering pollen to create kind of that pollen ball that was in a previous picture. It's a fine if you don't remember, but it create the pollen ball and then laying the egg next, like on the pollen ball, so the egg will eat the pollen and develop. And essentially, after she has laid that nest, and usually they lay around like 1 to 2 nests. The female bee will die off. So the life cycle of, or the, I guess, time of life of an adult bee is actually only around 2 months. But in the bee hotel, the egg will, start to eat the pollen, develop into a larva, and then kind of around for a spring bee, summer, for a summer bee around fall, the bee will develop into a pupa. So it will kind of spin a cocoon around itself and create a cocoon structure, where it will then develop over the course of the year, like through the winter, or through the fall into the winter, and then back around again to around early to mid-spring, where that the bee larvae that was laid last year will basically chew their way out of the bee hotel and emerge into your backyard. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, that was. So just to kind of summarize, it seems like the goal is to get the bee hotel out in time, like you're showing, for the females to work her magic and lay her eggs in the tubes. And then at that point, you're not going to get any bees emerging until the following year. So it's keeping track of those tubes until the following year when your new bees will emerge.
But I guess if you have bee hotel, or if you have bees laying eggs in your bee hotel, you have bees around your garden. So like, I guess I wouldn't be like scared that you're not going to have any bees for a whole year. Like, if they're laying eggs, the adults are around.
There were lots of questions people are, and you could stay on this slide. They're very interested in the storage piece that you were talking about. Someone was asking about, could you keep them in an unfinished basement in the winter, the capped tubes? Would that be a good spot?
I guess I'm not sure. A lot of the resources I've read have talked about, trying to make them as outdoor as possible. I think something that I might worry about with an unfinished basement would be, you're still, being insulated from the house, like from the house on top of it. Your house has insulation. So it would probably still be a little bit warmer than, the outside. And so I mean, you can definitely try it. I don't think there's really, much harm in you trying. And, if it works, it works. That's great. I guess I would be a little worried if it was too warm for them to develop correctly.
Someone was asking about like a refrigeration option. Is that?
Yeah. I know that I guess more commercial, I work a lot with mason bees, so commercial mason bee growers will refrigerate their bees. I unfortunately do not know the exact temperature that they are supposed to be refrigerated at. I do know people refrigerate their cocoons. I can look up some resources and send them to Amy, and Amy, if you'd be so kind, maybe to post them on the Third Thursday resources, and so I can. Yeah,
Sure, would be happy to.
thank you.
Someone was just, I'm just trying to find the ones that are similar so we can keep that thread going. There was someone who was asking, maybe that came, let me see. Taking like the entire hotel with this, like just sealed or unsealed, and taking that into the garage, or is it better just to remove the capped tubes?
I don't think there's any issue with you know, taking the whole hotel with you and putting it in the garage. I don't think that's really an issue. I think I would just recommend, kind of checking each tube before you can't put the whole structure in, just checking the cap tubes that are in there to check for potential wasp parasitism. But yeah, you could definitely just, plop the whole bee hotel. I don't think it necessarily needs to be just the cap tubes.
Okay. This may not be your area of expertise, so feel free to say no, thank you. But this question is plant related. So they were asking if spring bulbs like crocuses and narcissus are a good source of pollen for spring bees in case my yard doesn't have a spring flowering fruit trees. So where are our solitary bees finding different sources in spring?
You're right. Unfortunately, plants are not my area of expertise. I know, I guess I can tell you a little bit about what I know and what is kind of the early stuff that I look for when I'm looking for bees out in the wild. Unfortunately, a lot of it's trees because I usually go for large aggregations. But you're right, apples are common, flowering trees in spring. Eastern redbud is a very common tree for it flowers early, and a lot of bees use it as pollen resource. I know particularly for mason bees, they love it. They are obsessed with Eastern redbud. Trying to think if I know any other ones. I don't know, but if you Google maybe flowers for pollinators, Pennsylvania, and anything by Penn State Extension or Penn State Master Gardeners, they're great, reliable resources of and I've worked with Master Gardeners before. I'm pretty sure they have lists of pollinator friendly plants for Pennsylvania. So I'm sorry I couldn't be more help.
No worries. And I would just chime in and say, any of the spring ephemeral wildflowers that do pop up early, those are native. We have tons of them at Jenkins if you're local and want to come visit at that time of year to get inspired. But those would be great sources of that early spring support for the solitary bees, as well as I know that certain ones really support our bumblebee queens as well. All right. Let's switch to talking just a little bit about the I'm going to call it the stump concept that you showed about just drilling holes into a stump. Someone said that they have had dead trees taken down and had high stumps left. Is it a good idea to just drill some 6-inch long holes into them as opposed to building a bee hotel?
I guess it's one of those things where I feel like I'm being a little wishy-washy here, but I don't think it would hurt to try. But I guess it's something that I would be a little, I guess, to keep on the lookout is because a stump is so, I guess, kind of low to the ground, presumably since the tree has been chopped down, you might kind of run the risk of, squirrels or other vermin or, birds maybe kind of pecking at pecking at the holes that you drilled because, they're kind of like beak or, claw level, for squirrels. So you might just have, I would just keep an eye out for, any squirrels that, might be trying to get into those holes or stuff like that. But I definitely don't think it would hurt to, try it out. I guess I would recommend drilling along the side. I don't know if they would nest kind of vertically. I've only seen them nest kind of like horizontally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. This person also asked about the wood drilled with holes and the cleaning process for that. Is that anything that you need to manage or keep your eye on?
Like, yes, I guess like that's kind of one of the reasons why I personally prefer the wood, like wood structure to PVC pipe, because it's more easy to clean. Yeah, I think but I guess like also like, I made a very big deal about cleaning, but also like the bees do live in the wild still. Like, I don't think, I can say as an entomologist, I'm not out here every spring with my little scrub brush, scrubbing any potential hole that may be a mason bee house. So, I like, yes, the drilled blocks are a little more difficult to clean. I think with kind of a bottle cleaner, there's like this thing with the scrubby brush on the end, you could probably get some cleaning that way. But yeah, yes, the drilled blocks are a little more difficult to clean than the, kind of the tubes that you have out.
While we're talking about cleaning, someone was asking about using vinegar instead of bleach. Is that an option?
I guess I'm not sure. I've only seen people use bleach. Maybe that's kind of like my science background showing, because you need everything to be like as sterile as possible. But like I guess like I feel bad being like, try it and see. But like you could definitely try it. Like I think honestly any cleaning is better than no cleaning. So yeah.
Great. There's two separate pieces that I'm going to put together here, which is someone was asking where would the bees make their homes in nature if we didn't put up bee hotels? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I guess I'll only talk about solitary cavity nesting bees. Because I could get into a whole range of kind of living structures, but for cavity nesting, kind of in the wild, they would kind of make their home in dead wood, such as kind of this photo here. You can see a little hole. So, any hole that's like long enough for them to make their nest in, that's kind of like where they would do it. I've also, and there's such cool photos. I don't think this is a species that was here in the US, but some mason bees, they've made their home in shells. There are pictures of someone has sliced open a shell, and you can kind of see the concentric the ring with the bee, the nesting structure inside. It's amazing. Also hollow reeds, dry reeds that are kind of broken and just dried out and been left there. They make their home in there. Yeah, it's so just kind of like any hollow cavity that is long enough and not too large for them, they would make their home in the wild.
Great. So adding on to that, with the hollow stems, someone was asking, that they've read planting native perennials and leaving the stems over the winter is potentially better than bee hotel. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. I've seen some people do that. I guess like this is kind of where my research bias is showing is I've personally have not used that or have seen that kind of like in my work environment. So I guess I can't really speak for the effectiveness and how many you would get. I know a lot of people are kind of proposing like no mow much, no mow something. It
May.
basically, oh no, yes, thank
Yeah.
you, no May. To kind of increase pollinator habitat. And I think like I don't know if I would say better than Bee Hotel, probably a little more natural if I'm being honest. And but like I guess it just comes down to personal preference. If you want like how many do you want? And yeah.
So I'm personally intrigued by this because we actually have practices at Jenkins. We really strive for ecological and environmental horticulture. And if we have to cut down stems just from a kind of like a safety aspect or a garden aspect, we are trying to leave them at a certain height, thinking that the bees would utilize them and other insects would utilize them for habitat. So you were saying that with the bee hotels, we're headed this way, right? But stems, we are headed this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just clicked in my head that is more of a vertical instead of a horizontal.
Yeah. It's funny because like I it's kind of like I've read in theory that they use stems, but I just haven't seen it. And like this, I feel like this kind of makes it a little difficult, I guess, because one thing that's really interesting in the solitary bee thing is that it's really hard to study kind of these bees in their natural habitat because they're so solitary. You know, you would have to be extraordinarily lucky to find kind of a group of mason bees, leafcutter bees, kind of in what I would consider their natural habitat, like in hollow tubes, and even in stems. I think like it just so I guess like I would have to say I'd have to read more on
Yeah.
you know the like using stems and kind of trying to emulate their more natural habitat. Um,
Right. And that's totally valid. And maybe what I'm getting confused in my head is, insects that are overwintering in stems versus a solitary bee who's utilizing it for a nest. So maybe that's where my head is going. Maybe the stems are more of a insect overwintering helper. So we'll leave it at that. So with the solitary bee, someone was actually asking a bit about like bee stings and things. Can you talk to solitary bees and if they have the ability to sting?
yeah. And I feel like this is always my like highlight of when I'm talking to, any sort of um, non-bee scientist audience, because I'm like, I have some good news for everyone. Actually, so male solitary bees, actually or male bees of any kind do not have stingers. Um, so they cannot sting you, which yay. And another thing is that solitary bees are, I guess, much less likely to sting you, and also their stings do not hurt as much. Um, so they're I feel like I've been, I wouldn't say mean to the bees, but I've definitely manhandled a few bees in my time. And I will say I have never gotten stung by a solitary bee. Um, and this is, my third year doing this. Well, no, third year and then plus 2 extra years, but I only worked with the cocoons. And I guess the one thing that's interesting about solitary bees is, when we think of a bee sting, we're like, ow, honeybees. And honeybees are interesting. And also all social bees, honestly, are usually have a more powerful stinger because they have something to protect, I guess. Um, the worker bees, their jobs are to, protect their hive, among other things. So, their stings are designed to hurt. Like honeybees have barbs on their stinger, so it gets caught in your skin, and that's why it hurts so much. And solitary bees, they don't have as much to protect. They just have their nest, and so yes, they can sting, but it should definitely not hurt as much as what we'd expect from a bumblebee or a honeybee.
Mhm. Thanks for that clarification. So I'm going to take you back to the tubes just for a quick moment on two questions. The first is just talking a little bit again about needing to close the ends of the tube. I remember you saying that that was a bit for like predation and other things that can kind of get into the hotel. Is there any other reason for needing to close the end of the tubes?
Yeah. So I guess like I feel like I made this a little bit confusing because I was talking about you closing one end of the tube, and then also I was talking about the capped end. So yeah, I would say you only close the kind of the back end of the tube, and the female bee will close the front end. Um, and no, I guess not really. Like there isn't really any reason to close it besides like protecting the bees from like parasites and um parasitic wasps or beetles or anything that wants to get in and make it its home instead. But I think like the protection aspect is pretty important, like that it's just kind of like and like I will say like I've done it before. It really does not take that long, especially when you're doing hot glue. You kind of just like squeeze it and like it dries really quickly. So I think it's like kind of just a low stakes effort to that can do a lot of good. So I guess so no, there isn't really any reason beside protection, but I guess I just want to push the idea that protection is really important.
Perfect. You quickly mentioned bamboo tubes, and
Mhm.
someone said that they've read the pros and cons of using bamboo. Do you have any other tidbits to share about using bamboo as an option?
No, not really. I this maybe I'm just too young, but I feel like when I kind of entered the kind of solitary bee scene, uh, bamboo tubes were kind of, I guess, falling out of favor a little bit. I guess one pro of them is that, bamboo is a invasive, fast spreading. I don't know if I'd call it a weed, but I'm gonna call it a weed. And so like anything that essentially kind of helps you get that out, um or at least like keeps it managed would be good. It's natural. Wood, that's always good. um but I guess the cons are it's not always the diameter that we that is wanted. Trying to think of the other cons that I've heard of right now. Oh, it can, I think it can break pretty easily when dried. So you don't really want those kind of cracks running through your, nesting tube. Like, it's basically a open door for parasites and pathogens. But yeah, I feel bad. Like, a lot of what by the time I rolled up to the bee scene, like I haven't seen anyone really use bamboo tubes. Um, for their bee hotel. So I'm sorry, I can't speak a little bit more to that. But
No, that was good. And while we were talking tubes, one other tube question came in, which you mentioned paper tubes. This person was wondering, could you make your own like newspaper wrapped around a pencil? Are they stable enough? Or does it need to be kind of thicker and more sturdy?
I would say thicker and more sturdy. I wouldn't, because like Oh gosh. Um, I'm trying to see if I can find, oh, yeah. So as you can, like with the parasitic wasps in particular, they may be tiny, but they pack a punch. And you can kind of see this tube, is like, I think it's looks kind of like cardboard to me, but basically you don't want it kind of any thinner than thin cardboard because like using newspaper might be a little too thin because they can poke their essentially ovipositor like right through that. Um and also like I wouldn't call cardboard and paper straws particularly sturdy, but they are just a little more sturdy and able to weather the elements, especially the ones that are specifically made for bee hotels. Compared to newspaper, I feel like newspaper get soggy, it might collapse. Just those kind of things where you don't want a cave in and you'll be your nesting tube. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like kind of ways that you could make your own tubes without purchasing them. I feel bad. All most of the tubes that I have are purchased just for standardization. I have seen people make wooden blocks where you essentially have a wooden block and cut in half long wide, and you just kind of drill a certain diameter hole and like kind of like bind it together. This is kind of like what you see on the right here, and that's really interesting because you can open them up and see what's inside eventually. So if you're very
Grace,
craft,
you're doing great. That's a lot of questions. We're going to end on this note here, which someone was asking if there are any good resources to help identify bees so you can kind of get to know which are native, which are non-native bees that might be in your bee hotel.
yeah. Once again, I unfortunately didn't include that in my presentation, but I will send it to you, Amy. And so actually the lab that I work for now, the López-Uribe lab, we run a bee monitoring program with the Master Gardeners of Pennsylvania, and I can send a website, and there are tons of resources on identifying bees, and I can see if I can get access to, and I'll have to ask the person if it'd be okay if I could share, this resource, because it is part of her doctoral thesis. But basically a list of bees that were found in the Penn State Arboretum, which might, if you are in Pennsylvania, might give you a clue about, what bees might be in your bee hotel.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yes. Any of those extras, if you can share those with me, I will definitely pass those along. So Grace, thank you again for sharing your time and information with us. This was awesome. Lots of interest out there for bee hotels. And all of you who are still with us out there, hopefully you can join us next month. We're going to be diving into amphibians and reptiles in the mid-Atlantic regions. So hopefully you'll join us for that. But thanks again, Grace, for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody. Bye.